My brother framed me for theft while I worked overtimes, so I collected evidence, silently, and watched him beg for mercy he didn't deserve. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. Growing up, I learned early that my parents relied on me paying bills, fixing things around the house, making sure nothing ever went wrong. While my friends were out partying or binge-watching shows, I was picking up extra shifts at work just to make ends meet, saving every penny for emergencies. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Ryan, floated through life like he didn't have a single care. He had this effortless charm that made people laugh, including Mom and Dad, and they fell for it every time. He'd forget chores, lose track of deadlines, and occasionally sneak out late at night, and somehow, he always got away with it. I've never been the type to complain. If Ryan forgot to pay a utility bill, I'd quietly cover it. If he left a mess in the kitchen, I'd clean it. I honestly believed family worked that way, that we had each other's backs, and loyalty was mutual. I thought my sacrifices were noticed, that maybe one day Ryan would step up the way I always had. But there were subtle hints that maybe I was the only one carrying the weight. Ryan would make these sly comments now and then. "Wow, you've been working again. Don't you ever sleep, big brother?" He'd smirk, leaning back in his chair. Or, "You really think money grows on trees?" Chill a little, at first. I laughed him off, thinking he was joking. But sometimes his words had this edge, like he was resentful of my discipline, my reliability. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to the faint hum of the street outside, thinking about how unfair it felt, but still, I trusted him. I thought our family bond meant something, that these small cracks would never turn into something worse. I had no idea that those little comments, those tiny digs, were just the surface of what Ryan was planning. That night, after another 12-hour shift, I came home and noticed something off something. I couldn't yet put my finger on and for the first time. A flicker of unease crept in. That week, my schedule was brutal. 12-hour shifts, stacked back-to-back, coffee, my only companion, and the office buzzing like a swarm of bees that never slept. I left the house before Ryan was even awake, the scent of burnt toast still clinging to the kitchen, and I returned long after dinner had cooled. I told myself it was temporary, that hard work always paid off eventually. But exhaustion was starting to settle into my bones. That Friday evening, I shuffled in, shoulders aching, eyes half-lidded. Expecting the quiet I usually came home to, but the living room was louder than usual. Ryan was sitting on the couch, earbuds dangling around his neck, grinning like he owned the place. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty finally made it home," he said, voice teasing, but with that familiar smugness. "Didn't think you'd survive another day?" I forced a tired smile, dropping my bag by the door. "Long day," I muttered. "Everything okay here?" "Oh yeah, he said, waving me off. But there was a twitch in his grin, something rehearsed. The kitchen looked untouched, bills stacked neatly on the counter, but something felt off. A drawer was slightly ajar, a small envelope sticking out, and my stomach sank. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it, chalk it up to Ryan's careless habits. But tonight, it gnawed at me. Mom and Dad wandered in from the garden, their faces lighting up at Ryan's joke, laughter spilling over. I watched them, this familiar scene twisting into something that felt foreign. They praised Ryan for small things. He'd mowed the lawn. He'd done the dishes, things I'd done countless times without a word of thanks. Their eyes glimmered with pride, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a cold knot formed. Ryan leaned back, smirking, and muttered under his breath, "Gotta hand it to you, big bro." Always playing the hero. I caught it, that sharp undercurrent of something I didn't recognize. Was it jealousy? Or something worse? I decided not to confront him. I just nodded, drained and wary, slipping into my bedroom as the sun dipped below the horizon. But that envelope on the counter stayed in my mind, a quiet signal that something had shifted, that my trust might soon be tested in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I woke up Saturday morning to chaos. My phone was buzzing relentlessly, messages from Mom and Dad, their tone sharp, clipped full of disbelief. Something had happened while I was at work, something they assumed I was responsible for. My stomach dropped before I even read the texts. When I walked into the living room, Ryan was sitting there like nothing had happened, a fake innocence plastered across his face. Mom's hands were shaking as she held the family safe. Open, empty, except for a few crumpled bills. "How could you do this?" she demanded, voice cracking. "You were supposed to be at work. We trusted you." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. "I don't," my voice faltered. "I was at the office the whole time. I swear I didn't touch anything." Ryan chuckled under his breath, that irritating smirk I'd learned to hate. "Wow, big bro," he said, leaning back. "You really are good at looking guilty. Almost makes me feel bad." His words dripped with sarcasm, but there was no remorse. Dad shook his head, glaring at me. "We found the safe open right after your shift ended. We've been calling the office, checking your time card." We don't know what else to think. I tried to stay calm, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. I was there. Ask anyone at work. I can show you the timestamps, but my protests fell on deaf ears. Mom and Dad were already turning back to Ryan, who shrugged innocently, hands raised like he was a victim of circumstance. The apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, and the sunlight filtering through the blinds only made the tension sharper. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I bit my tongue. Every instinct told me that if I reacted, I'd lose. Ryan was counting on that, so I did what I always did. I stayed silent. I nodded, pretending to consider their accusations, while inside, anger and disbelief roiled like a storm. I knew the truth, and I also knew that silence could be more powerful than any argument, if I played it right. But as Ryan's grin widened, I realized this wasn't just a prank or carelessness. He had planned this. And for the first time, I understood that my life as the responsible one had made me a target. I couldn't sleep that night. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. But every creak of the floorboards made my stomach knot. I kept replaying the morning over and over. Ryan's smirk, Mom's tears, Dad's disappointment. It didn't make sense. I'd been at work the entire time. Someone had framed me, and deep down, I knew who. The next day, I started paying closer attention. I checked the living room first, scanning for anything unusual. Ryan had left his laptop open, his phone carelessly tossed on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't touch it, but curiosity and suspicion gnawed at me. I noticed small inconsistencies, receipts sticking out of his drawer that didn't match his explanation, messages on his phone hinting at plans he never mentioned to anyone else. I began keeping quiet records, scribbling notes in a small notebook I kept tucked in my bag. Each little clue a timestamp of a delivery he'd claimed he didn't know about. The receipts for items I knew were missing was a thread I could follow. Every time I thought I had enough, another piece would surface. Ryan, of course, had no idea. He strutted around the apartment like he owned the place, bragging about trivial things and throwing subtle digs my way. "You really should try relaxing, big bro," he said casually, while tossing a remote onto the couch. "All that working overtime doesn't make the bills pay themselves." His laughter grated on me. I forced a tight smile, saying nothing. Inside, I was calculating, observing, recording every slip. Even the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Sunlight slanting through the blinds seemed harsher, highlighting every smudge and dust particle. The smell of Ryan's cologne mixed with leftover takeout made my stomach turn. A reminder that the home I knew had been infiltrated by the end of the day. I had a pattern forming, a trail of small lies, minor thefts, and deliberate manipulations that all pointed to Ryan. I felt a mix of rage and grim satisfaction. If I played this carefully, he wouldn't even know what hit him. But just as I thought I had a handle on things, I stumbled across something I wasn't expecting, something that made my heart stop. I couldn't believe my eyes. Hidden behind a stack of old magazines in Ryan's room was the family heirloom, our grandfather's pocket watch, the one Dad treasured most. I'd seen it countless times on the mantel, admired it without touching it, knowing it was priceless to everyone. And there it was, tucked carelessly in his drawer like some forgotten trinket. Along with receipts showing he'd been trying to sell it online for weeks, my stomach turned. Anger and disbelief colliding in a violent knot. Ryan hadn't just framed me for money, he was willing to betray the family in the most tangible, precious way possible. Every sly comment, every dig about money and effort, suddenly made sense. This wasn't jealousy. This was calculated, premeditated betrayal. I felt my hands shake as I carefully photographed the evidence, making sure I had timestamps, screenshots, and receipts. I wanted proof, irrefutable proof. Ryan was cunning, and if I confronted him without it, he'd wriggle out of any explanation. I needed him to be trapped by his own arrogance. That evening, he lounged in the living room, headphones around his neck, scrolling through his phone with that smug grin. "Relax, big bro," he said, catching me looking at him. "You're always so tense. You ever think maybe life's easier if you just chill?" His words were dripping with mockery, but I forced a calm nod. Inside, every nerve was buzzing, every instinct screaming to expose him. I stepped outside to clear my head. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt. The streetlights flickered as I walked, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the moment he'd finally be caught, the moment Dad and Mom would see the truth. But alongside that satisfaction was a darker thought. I had to be patient. One wrong move, and he'd cover his tracks. As I walked back inside, I glanced at the kitchen counter, the small envelope from weeks ago, still tucked under a stack of bills. That envelope had started it all, and now, with the heirloom in my grasp, I realized this was bigger than just money. It was personal. Ryan's smirk as he waved at me from the couch felt like a challenge. I knew deep down the game had just begun. From that day on, I became a shadow in my own home. I watched Ryan's every move, silently noting habits, conversations, and patterns. He had no idea. Every careless comment, every brag about money or charm became a piece of the puzzle. I stayed calm on the surface, nodding politely when he leaned back with that smug grin, all the while mentally cataloging every lie, every slip. Every opportunity he left unguarded, he strutted around like a king in a palace. Oblivious to the web tightening around him, "You really think working yourself to death makes a difference?" He said one evening, tossing his headphones onto the couch, "Life's about taking the easy wins." I forced a smile, my stomach churning. Easy for him, I thought. Easy for him to destroy trust and manipulate the family while I cleaned up his messes. I started recording discreetly, snippets of conversations, receipts he left lying around, screenshots from his messages. Each piece of evidence made the picture clearer. He wasn't just careless, he was deliberate. The betrayal wasn't random, and every time he gloated or joked about my boring life, it fueled a fire I barely controlled. The apartment felt different now, almost suffocating. The faint scent of old takeout mixed with Ryan's cologne, the hum of the refrigerator, even the sunlight coming through the blinds, it all reminded me I was trapped in his little game. But I had the upper hand. I just had to wait. Patience became a weapon. I began subtly influencing the family environment, small nudges to test his reactions. A missing receipt here, a comment there, watched him flinch or overreact, confirming he was guilty in ways he thought no one noticed. And yet, every time I caught him slipping, I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. Because as much as I was collecting evidence, I knew he was clever, and one wrong move could ruin everything. But the longer I watched, the more I realized just how reckless he was becoming. He was overconfident, and that arrogance would be his downfall. That night, I peeked at his laptop again, and something blinking on the screen made my heart skip a beat. It was bigger than I imagined, and it might finally give me the control I needed. I hit my breaking point that week. Every instinct told me I was inching closer to proving Ryan's betrayal. But instead of relief, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. Mom and Dad were still on his side, praising him for things I'd done silently for years, mowing the lawn, paying bills, even fixing the leaky faucet. They looked at me like I was a stranger, suspicious and defensive, while Ryan leaned back smug. Whispering jokes only he found funny, I sat alone in my bedroom one evening, the faint hum of the street outside mingling with the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. My eyes stung from exhaustion, my hands trembling as I clutched the small notebook where I'd been logging every detail. I'd been working overtime, keeping the household afloat, gathering evidence like a patient predator, and yet I felt powerless. The family I trusted, the home I'd fought to protect, seemed to have turned against me entirely. Ryan had gone a step further that day. He'd shown Mom and Dad messages from me. I hadn't sent it as screenshots, lies fabricated to make me look guilty. "See, he's always scheming," Ryan said, that awful smirk glued to his face. My parents' eyes filled with doubt, and for a moment I wanted to scream, to run out into the night and never look back, even the apartment the smell of stale takeout. The faint dust in the corners, the sunlight catching the mess he left behind, felt suffocating. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine, punished for being the responsible one, punished for trusting the wrong people. I wanted to lash out, to confront him physically, but I knew that would only ruin everything I'd been building. So I stayed quiet, the rage coiling inside me like a living thing, gnawing at my thoughts. And in that silence, I realized just how dangerous he had become. He wasn't just careless or entitled, he was manipulative, bold, and utterly convinced that I could do nothing. For the first time, I understood what it truly meant to be powerless, and it terrified me. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion and despair, a spark flickered a realization that the storm wasn't over, and soon he would pay for thinking he could destroy me. After that week, I stopped just observing. I became methodical, almost surgical, in collecting every piece of evidence Ryan left in his wake. Receipts, screenshots, timestamps, even recordings of him bragging or lying, gathered it all. Every careless slip he made became fuel for the moment when I would finally confront him. The sense of control was intoxicating after weeks of feeling powerless. Ryan, of course, had no idea. He strutted around the apartment like a king in a palace he'd won, completely unaware that I was quietly mapping out his every move. I watched him text, talk to friends, and casually manipulate our parents, all while I silently documented every lie and theft. He was reckless, confident that his charm made him untouchable, and every arrogant smirk he flashed only strengthened my resolve. The apartment felt tense in a way it never had before. The smell of leftover takeout lingered, mixed with his cologne, sunlight falling in harsh stripes across the carpet, highlighting the crumbs he left behind. It all reminded me that this was my home too, and I wasn't going to let him ruin it. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Clarily Evidence Ryan. Each file was precise, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Every photo of receipts, every screenshot of messages, every snippet of recorded conversation, the picture was becoming impossible to deny. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had the upper hand. Even my parents' praise of Ryan started to annoy me less. I no longer cared if they doubted me momentarily. Let them. Let him feel untouchable. Because when the time came, they would see the truth, and there would be no excuses, no clever lies left to protect him. That night, as I closed my laptop and the city hummed quietly outside, I felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation. Ryan had built his own cage with his arrogance, and I was finally ready to wait for him to step inside. But as I drifted toward sleep, I caught a glimpse of him glancing at my door, curious, suspicious, and unaware of just how close the walls were closing in. I knew the next step had to be perfect. Ryan was overconfident, thinking he had one, so I started subtly manipulating situations to catch him off guard. Small nudges here, casual remarks there. Rye tested his reactions, watching for cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Every flinch, every micro-expression told me exactly how far he'd go to protect himself. And I filed it away mentally like ammunition. One evening, I forgot to hide a crucial receipt on the counter, knowing Ryan would notice. Sure enough, his eyes flicked to it, a flash of panic crossing his face before he masked it with that infuriating grin. "Oh, that! I probably misplaced it," he muttered casually, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. I didn't comment, just nodded and went to my room, letting him stew in his own guilt. I also planted subtle hints with my parents, mentioning discrepancies I'd noticed in passing, framing questions that seemed innocent but made Ryan uneasy. Every comment was calculated. I could feel the tension in the apartment shifting. Ryan was starting to overthink his confidence, cracking just enough that he left more clues behind. Even the air in the apartment seemed heavier now. The faint smell of takeout and old laundry felt oppressive, sunlight streaming through the blinds, catching dust particles like tiny spotlights on his carelessness. I noticed him moving faster, acting louder, trying to cover up things he normally wouldn't even care about. The most telling moment came when Ryan bragged aloud to a friend on the phone about his cleverest trick yet, thinking I couldn't hear him. I recorded it, heart hammering, knowing this would be a key piece of the puzzle. His own arrogance was becoming the trap itself. By the end of the night, I had everything I needed for the confrontation, but I wasn't ready to strike yet. Patience was my weapon, and he was running out of time without even realizing it. I lay in bed, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and thought, any moment now, one small slip, and it'll all unravel. But as I drifted toward sleep, I caught the faintest shadow under my Dora, hint that Ryan might be sensing the trap I'd carefully laid. The day finally came when I knew I had him cornered. Ryan was lounging in the living room, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that every step, every word, had been documented. My parents were quietly observing from the kitchen, curious but still unsure, and I could feel the tension coiling like a spring ready to snap. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the mix of rage and satisfaction coursing through me. "Ryan," I said casually, voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about the safe, the receipts, and that pocket watch." His eyes flicked up, confusion quickly turning to nervousness, and I saw the first crack in his smug armor. "What do you mean?" he asked, leaning back, trying to laugh it off. But it was forced, hollow. I walked over slowly, laptop in hand. "I mean all of this," I said, flipping it open to show the folder labeled Evidence Rion. Screenshots of his messages, photos of the missing heirloom, timestamps, proving he was lying. Recordings of him, bragging it, was all there. His jaw tightened. "That's not real," he stammered, but I could see the panic behind his eyes. Mom gasped. Dad's hands trembled slightly, a mix of anger and disbelief crossing his face. Ryan's voice grew louder, desperate. I can explain," he cried, but the words were hollow, unconvincing. I stayed calm, letting him dig his own hole. "You've lied, stolen, and manipulated everyone you thought would protect you," I said quietly, letting each word land. "And for what? Money, attention, some sense of control." My voice stayed even, but inside, I felt the rush of vindication. The years of frustration boiling into satisfaction. Ryan's smug grin was gone. His voice cracked as he begged, pleaded, tried to shift blame, but it was too late. The proof was undeniable, and for the first time, he realized he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out. I stepped back, letting my parents process the evidence, letting the weight of truth sink in. Ryan's arrogance had been his undoing, and finally, the tables had turned, but as I closed my laptop and watched his expression crumble, I realized that the real victory wasn't in confrontation. It was in the calm, patient control I had maintained all along. The apartment felt heavier that evening, but in a different way. The air no longer smelled of stale takeout or Ryan's cologne. It smelled like tension, accountability, and the weight of truth finally settling in. Mom and Dad were quiet, processing everything I had shown them. I watched their expressions shift from doubt to shock to the slow, dawning realization of just how long Ryan had been manipulating them. Ryan sat slumped on the couch, his usual smugness replaced by a pale, anxious look. I didn't mean he started, but his words stumbled over themselves, weak and unconvincing. I didn't interrupt. I let the evidence speak for itself. Screenshots, photos, timestamps, recordings. It was all there, undeniable and final. Mom's voice trembled as she looked at him. "Ryan, how could you do this?" There was no anger in the question, only disbelief and hurt. Dad's hands were shaking as he picked up one of the receipts, his eyes narrowing in disappointment. "We trusted you. We trusted both of you," he said softly, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. For the first time, Ryan's attempts at excuses fell flat. He begged, pleaded, even tried to charm his way out, but it was useless. The arrogance that had carried him this far had finally become his undoing. Every lie he told, every manipulation he attempted, crumbled under the weight of proof. I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. The family I had silently carried on my shoulders was beginning to recognize the truth. My role as the responsible one was finally acknowledged, and for the first time, I didn't have to fight silently anymore. I could sit back and watch the consequences unfold. Even Ryan's defeat had a strange symmetry to it. He had believed his charm and cunning would shield him, and now he was exposed, forced to face the reality of his actions. The apartment, once a place of tension and betrayal, now felt like a stage where justice, slow and calculated, had finally been served. But as relief washed over me, I couldn't shake the thought lingering in the back of my mind. Had he truly learned his lesson? Or was this just the beginning of a new kind of reckoning? It's been a few weeks since everything came to light, and the apartment finally feels like mine again. The tension that had lingered for months, the constant gnawing anxiety, The whispered jokes, the feeling of walking on eggshells around Ryan has started to lift. Mom and Dad have begun to recognize my sacrifices. Finally, seeing the years of responsibility I quietly carried while Ryan thought he could skate by, it's strange, almost surreal, to feel acknowledged after so long. Well, he's still here, but the arrogance is gone. He walks a little slower, avoids eye contact, and no longer tries to charm his way out of mistakes. I catch glimpses of him staring at the laptop where the evidence still sits, a reminder that his actions have consequences. For the first time, I feel the calm satisfaction of someone who doesn't need to fight to prove their integrity because the truth speaks louder than any argument. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what this whole experience taught me. Patience isn't passive, it's strategic. Silence isn't weakness, it's a tool. And sometimes, the best way to deal with betrayal isn't to confront it in the heat of the moment, but to let actions, evidence, and time reveal the truth. I feel stronger, sharper, and more in control of my own life than I ever have before. Even small moments now feel different. The hum of the refrigerator, sunlight filtering through the blinds, the faint smell of coffee, it all reminds me that this is my space again. I can breathe without the tension pressing down on my chest. Ryan's mistakes are still his own, but the power balance has shifted. He begged for mercy once, but this time, I didn't need to give it to him. Watching him confront the reality of his actions, powerless and humbled, was enough. Justice, delayed but deliberate, finally arrived. As I close my laptop for the night, I can't help but smile quietly to myself. Years of being the responsible one, the patient one, the one who always cleaned up after him it all mattered. And in the end, I didn't just reclaim my home or my family's trust. I reclaimed myself.